This is like exactly what I want to eat on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Hey everyone, it's Nia and welcome back to the Food52 Test Kitchen. I'm gonna make a version of my favorite type of soup. It's a white bean and sausage soup, kale, parmesan, and some heavy cream. It would probably take you less than 45 minutes to make this. It's pretty quick, it's also very hearty, and it's also very cozy. So let's get started. The first thing I'm gonna do is take the sausage out of its casing. So I'm just gonna take it like this and just like squeeze it out. This is Italian spicy sausage, which I like. It has like the fennel seeds and that also adds a lot of flavor. So here I have a heavy bottomed large pot. I would say it's pretty important to use a heavy bottom pot when you're making a soup. So I'm gonna turn this on to medium high. This is gonna heat up for a few minutes, maybe just one. And then actually I'm just gonna add the oil now. So I'm gonna add about a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. And I'm just gonna let that heat up until it starts to sizzle a little bit. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna cook the sausage until it's nice and golden brown on all sides. When I'm cooking sausage like this or ground beef or anything that's not like a whole meat, I like to kind of press it down on the pan so that more surface area of the meat that's touching the pan and gets to cook and gets all nice and brown. And then I leave it there untouched for about 5 or so minutes and then go in, stir it up so that the rest of it can also get browned. So I'm gonna add the sausage. So as I was saying before, I'm gonna go in and kind of press it down like this. But if you can kind of get it as flat as you can, then it's gonna help to speed up the cooking process. So you can see it's almost cooked through. So I'm gonna go in and kind of break it up and scrape it up from the bottom of the pan. That looks nice. It's very like golden brown. Ooh, all right, here we go. Okay, I'm just gonna break this up into like 1-inch pieces. And if you want them to look a little bit more organic and not so like straight angles, you can just break it up a little bit earlier too. But I honestly don't think it matters that much. And then see all these kind of yummy brown bits that are sticking to the bottom of the pan. Those we're gonna deglaze with wine and broth later, and they're obviously gonna like get soaked up into the soup. And that kind of stuff adds so much flavor. The thing here too is that you don't want to overcook it and you kind of want to remove it before it's completely cooked through, and because we're going to add it back into the soup later and it's going to simmer with everything else for about 15 to 20 minutes. So yeah, you don't want to overcook it. This looks good. So you can see here now there's still a few pieces of sausage in here, that's totally fine. And there's also those nice yummy brown bits that are kind of caramelized and are going to add so much flavor to the soup. I'm going to add a little bit more of oil, so about another tablespoon. And now I'm gonna add our mirepoix. This is 1 cup carrot, 1 cup celery, and 2 cups of onion. And a mirepoix is pretty much like the base of any soup or any stew. And a lot of sauces, honestly, a lot of cooking. I'm just gonna saute these until the onions and the carrots and the celery are kind of nice and tender and slightly softened. You don't have to let it cook too long, maybe just about 5 minutes or so. Once this has kind of softened a little bit, I'm gonna add a few garlic cloves. I have 4 here, a tip that we posted on Instagram the other day. I'm not gonna do it now, but you can pop them in the microwave for even just 5 seconds, and the peel is gonna pop right off. It's really nice. I'm just gonna grate the garlic in using this microplane. The thing about garlic that I think is interesting is the finer it's chopped or grated, the more garlic flavor you're gonna get. I'm just gonna stir this again, and I'm gonna cook the garlic until it's nice and fragrant, so even just 30 seconds more. So to the soup, I'm also gonna add a few spices. I have dried oregano, I have dried chili flakes, and then I also have fresh thyme. So here is a little bunch. I don't think I'm gonna add all of this, but I am gonna add 2 tablespoons. If you don't have fresh thyme, then that's totally fine. You can definitely just use dried as well. I know, I love using fresh herbs. I feel like the thing though, and I'm sure a lot of people in New York City apartments can relate, it's like I would love to use fresh herbs, but I don't have anywhere in my kitchen to have like a little herb garden. And the reality is, like, when I buy a bunch of fresh herbs, I use probably a few stems. I feel like a little herb garden is the dream. So now I'm gonna add the 2 tablespoons of thyme. In my recipe, I say to add about 1/4 teaspoon of red pepper chili flakes, but I'm just gonna add like a generous pinch. And then the last herb, a little bit of dried oregano, so I have a tablespoon. It's important to add the spices and herbs at the beginning, so when you're actually sauteing the rest of the veggies and stuff like that, that's just gonna kind of open them up and help them blossom and release as much flavor as possible. I love that smell of like onions and herbs, it's so good. When I was developing this soup, I wanted it to have a slight tomatoey flavor, but nothing overpowering, so I decided to just add a little bit of tomato soup, and that also is gonna add kind of a nice reddish color. So here's about 2 tablespoons. Easier to just do it all at once. And now this is gonna cook for also another 30 seconds to a minute until it's kind of nice and brick red and slightly caramelized. This is gonna add kind of like a nutty, nice tomato flavor. You can do this at the beginning when you're sauteing the mirepoix. Just add like a little sprinkle of salt. If you do with the onions, it's gonna help to kind of sweat them out and bring out any of that moisture in the onion. But you can do it now too, and kind of salting as you go versus all at the end is actually gonna prevent you from adding too much salt. It smells really good. And the thing about this base right here, you could either continue with my recipe, or you could use this base and make so many other types of soup with it, which is the great thing. Now I'm gonna deglaze with a little bit of wine. I am doing about 1/2 cup. And it doesn't have to be fancy white wine, it can just be any type of regular cooking wine. I like to use wine that maybe I've had sitting in the counter for a little too long that I'm not gonna drink. I like to just save it for when I'm gonna cook something. Now I'm gonna stir it and kind of scrape up the yummy brown bits from the bottom of the pan for about 30 seconds more until that strong alcohol flavor has kind of started to disappear. This is 6 cups of chicken stock. I kind of go between using stock and also mixing water with better than bouillon. I tested this recipe with both and it's delicious. So now I'm gonna assemble the rest of the soup. I have 2 cans of butter beans. Then I'm gonna also add the sausage. And as I was saying before, if any of the sausage is uncooked, this is gonna just finish off that process. And then the last thing I'm gonna add is 1 bay leaf. If you don't have bay leaves, don't feel like you have to rush out to the store to buy bay leaves just for this recipe. It's not gonna make a huge difference. I'm actually gonna add 2. It just adds a little bit of like earthy herbiness to the final soup. I'm gonna bring this to a boil, and then I'm gonna cover it and let it simmer for about 20 minutes to get all the flavors to like melt together. And yeah, it's gonna taste really good. And then afterwards, we're gonna add the kale, we're gonna add the cream, and we're gonna add some Parmesan. Okay, so it's almost done simmering. I'm gonna cut some kale. This is dino kale, and I use about 4 cups of chopped, but who really wants to measure kale? So this is just like a large bunch. So I'm just gonna go in and kind of thinly slice it. So into like finger width thick pieces. Let's take a look. Hopefully I didn't have the heat on too high. Yum. Okay, I could have probably turned the heat down a little bit so that it was more of a simmer, not a boil, but it smells amazing, it looks amazing, and if you're in a pinch and you don't feel like you have 20 minutes, you can just let it simmer for 5 minutes. It's still gonna be really good. Letting it simmer for a longer period of time is just gonna enhance flavors and is also gonna thicken it just a little bit. Now I'm gonna add all the kale. The reason why I'm adding the kale now at the end is it still stays like a nice vibrant green. If you cook the kale for too long, it's gonna almost start to look a little brown, and it'll still be good, but it just looks prettier if it's nice and vibrant. I'm just using pre-grated Parmesan just because it's easier. You could absolutely just use a block of Parm and grate it right in. So I'm gonna do about 1/3. One thing, if you have a block of Parmesan, you could also add the rind in there when it's simmering. That also adds a nice nutty flavor. I'm also gonna add a little bit of heavy cream. If you are dairy-free or you just wanna leave the cream out, that's totally fine. You're not gonna miss it a lot. It's kind of just to add that like slight creaminess to the soup and also the color. The soup is already really hearty as it is. I personally don't feel like you need to add anything more. I mean, you can kind of tell there's a lot of stuff in the soup, but if you wanna add a carb, you could definitely add pasta. Tortellini, I think, would be my go-to, pasta addition here. I'm also gonna add a little bit of champagne vinegar. You could really use any kind of vinegar. You could use apple cider. You could also use white vinegar as well, but champagne vinegar is a little bit sweeter. It's also a little bit less acidic, and it also has a little bit lighter flavor than white vinegar. I'm adding a tablespoon here. The last thing I'm gonna do is season it with a little bit of salt and pepper. Usually when I'm developing recipes, I add a measurement for salt, but in this case, I wanted people to kind of season it to taste. I just kind of encourage you to season as you go. This is one of my favorite pepper mills. It's really nice because it's like a one-handed thing. All you have to do is push a button and it just comes right out. Okay, lots of pepper. I think that's probably enough. But this is like exactly what I want to eat on a rainy Sunday afternoon. The great thing about the soup is that you could make it in advance. You could store this in the fridge for up to 3 to 4 days. You could also freeze it. That's so good. Okay, now we're gonna plate my favorite part of the whole recipe. This looks really good. It's always a battle between how much broth do I want versus how much of like everything else do I want. And I feel like I do always want it to really feel like a soup. I go heavy with broth. I also just love a broth. I went through a phase last winter where I would stop at those bone broth cafes and I would get just like a cup of bone broth in the afternoon and walk around with that instead of like my coffee or tea, and it was amazing, highly recommend. So we have a little bean, we have a little sausage, a lot of kale, it looks amazing. I'm gonna finish it off with a little bit of Parmesan. Here, I feel like this would be a nice part to have just like freshly grated Parmesan, honestly, rather than this, but it's still Parmesan and it's still gonna be good. Ready for the final taste, even though I've already tasted it many times, but I'm gonna get a bean. So good. And I really love the little Parmesan on top. I love how it kind of melts in the soup, and sometimes if you add enough, you can even get those little like stringy Parmesan cheese balls. In my opinion, I think this is the perfect soup. Super quick, super easy, and there's so many ways you can make it your own at home. So I really encourage you to try it. If you do, let me know. I would love to hear from you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.